Although neither were involved in those talks in Pakistan, both Iran and the US have each outlined their conditions for ending the war. Tehran is demanding an end to what it calls aggression and targeted assassinations. It's also seeking guarantees against future attacks and reparations for war damages. Tehran is calling for an end to fighting on all fronts, including conflict involving its allied groups, and it wants its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz recognised. While President Trump's 15-point list hasn't been published, US media leaks do suggest it includes the following: Iran dismantling its nuclear facilities and promising to never develop nuclear weapons. The US is also calling on Iran to limit the range and number of ballistic missiles it has, to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to end its support for regional allies. Well, earlier I was joined by Ross Harrison. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and also author of Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy, and Sina Tossi, who's a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. And we spoke about how Donald Trump's past dealings with the Iranians make future negotiations much more difficult.
Trump, famously, he ran in 2024 on a campaign of wanting a deal and wanting to end wars and wanting a deal with Iran and other adversaries, and tried to portray himself as a president of peace. He entered into multiple rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, both earlier in 2025. There were multiple rounds of negotiations that preceded the June 2025 surprise Israeli attack on Iran. Those negotiations fell apart in the aftermath of that war. But they picked up again in January and February of this year in the wake of the protests in Iran, brutal government crackdown, and Trump kind of signaling military escalation. Nevertheless, there were a couple rounds of negotiations, which, according to the mediators, including the Omanis, the Omani mediator, as well as a British national security official who was there, who has written about it, that these negotiations really made progress. And it seems like there was a deal to be had that was stronger than the Obama-era 2015 nuclear deal, wherein Iran would have given up one of its main bargaining chips, which is a stockpile of highly enriched uranium that's currently buried near central Iran in Esfahan.
And Ross, we are now seeing these talks that have been happening in Islamabad, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia also taking part for the foreign ministers' meeting there. Do you think these talks could lead potentially to talks, whether direct or indirect, to take us to another stage?
Well, eventually, perhaps, Sarah, that it's possible. I think what's important is there's a channel opening up, but I don't think the timing is right for that, because one of the things that I know about Iran is that they believe that any time they've shown flexibility in terms of willing to meet. So, for example, as Sina mentioned, they met in 2025. They were bombed during the negotiations that took place in Geneva. 2026, the same thing. And there's a history of the Iranians showing flexibility. For example, after 9/11, there was a lot of cooperation between the United States and Iran and Afghanistan. And within 2 months, the Bush administration, George W. Bush, construed that as weakness and the flexibility as weakness, and then basically labeled Iran part of the axis of evil. So there's a history and a concern in Tehran that if they show negotiating flexibility, which is why many of their positions in that plan are maximalist, if they show any flexibility, that will not be construed as flexibility and pragmatism. It will be construed as weakness. And that's the danger, particularly given the possibility of some kind of a next phase of a military campaign.
Very briefly, this is a turning point, it seems, especially when you hear of US troops potentially entering Iran, maybe Kharg Island, maybe the Strait of Hormuz. Who knows at this point? What are the things that you both individually think we should be looking out for?
Well, I think you should be looking for what, after this war is over, what does the regime actually do? And a couple things that I think are important to understand. The Islamic Republic was kind of running on fumes over the last couple of years. And there was an attempt, obviously, to eliminate this entire regime. The U.S. and Israel both had one of its core political objectives was to eliminate this regime. So if the regime survives, I think one of the questions is going to be, what will its priorities be? And I think its priorities will be economic, and that's where I think in terms of the plans, the removal of sanctions, which has partially already happened, Sarah, in terms of the oil sanctions. And I think the other thing is there'll have to be at some point, I would imagine, some kind of renegotiation of a social contract between the regime and the Iranian people. And if that does not happen, if there's not some flexibility on the social issues and so forth, and we kind of try to go back to the old days, I think the regime may have bought itself a year or two, but not much more. I think there's probably going to be something to watch for in terms of that.
And last thoughts to you, Sina?
Yes, I would just say in the very short term, I would watch what's going to happen to the U.S. stock market, the price of oil, bond yield rates. Tomorrow, we saw that Trump had been trying to really manipulate the market in terms of his talk of negotiations, ending this war. And on Friday, that kind of fell apart. It seemed like many traders stopped believing that. So it'll be interesting to see tomorrow will that goes. And then if within the next couple days, if these mediation efforts by Pakistan and other countries, if they kind of bear fruit, if not, Trump may very well be walking into an escalation trap with ground troops that he can, he'll dig himself potentially in a deeper hole that's going to be then harder for everyone